So the dark web or the dark nets are parts of the town that your parents always say don't go to. For some of you, it could be where all the fun stuff is. For most people, it's where all the bad stuff happens.
What's up? Welcome to Same Same But Tech, a podcast where we explain the most talked about tech buzzwords, one analogy at a time. I'm Mahan, and today is all about the dark web. What would you do if you were invisible? I'm serious. If no one could find you or even see you. Okay, maybe not invisible, but what if you were completely and utterly anonymous? You could say whatever you wanted, do whatever you wanted, act however you wanted, and no one would know that you were actually you. Honestly, I'm not sure what I would do. I know for a fact I would probably go to work in my underwear. And I can admit that because I'm not really ashamed of that, because I basically do that on Zoom like every day. But I don't know what else I would do. Would I do bad things, illegal things? Maybe I'd just do good things. What if I would just secretly blurt out compliments to my friends?
Hey, buddy, I like you.
Well, what if I told you there was a place we could try this invisibility thing out? The thing is, you can't really walk there, and you can't drive there, but you can surf there. In this episode of Same Same, we take a tour of the anonymous internet, also known as the dark web.
I'm Andrew Lewman. I'm principal researcher for Lex Daily Technology. I'm vice president at DarkOwl.
Andrew is one of the biggest names in the dark web space.
And I'm one of the co-founders of the Tor Project.
If you've heard of the dark web, you've probably heard of Tor. Spelled T-O-R. Tor stands for the onion router. Tor is the most popular software for accessing the dark web. It's kind of like a dark web internet browser. Now, the reason you need special software to access the dark web is because the internet is complicated. It's sophisticated. It has layers. In fact, it has 3 layers. The outside or top layer of the internet, the one you're on most days, it's called the surface web.
Surface web is effectively anything you can find in a search engine. Say Google, say Bing, Yandex, whatever you like. They crawl open pages. There's no logins.
The surface web is pretty familiar to all of us. When you Google podcasts and Same Same pops up, or if you're reading the news or watching some videos, that's all usually surface web stuff. Sometimes people like to use an iceberg analogy to explain layers of the web. The top of the iceberg, that's above the water, that's the surface web. But if you dip your head just below the water, well, now you're swimming in what's called the deep web.
Deep web is generally anything behind authentication, meaning you have to log into it. So things like your bank account should not be easily crawlable by Google, nor should your email, nor should your private files that you store on your laptop or your phone should not show up in a search result. And that's generally considered the deep web. And size-wise, the deep web is generally considered to be 100 times larger than the surface web.
The deep web is 100 times larger than the surface web. 100 times is a lot. But the thing is, the deep web isn't really that sexy. It's actually a lot of medical records, academic transcripts, bank statements, legal docs, blah. You don't need any special software to access that stuff or to surf the deep web. Usually, you just need a login and a password. Okay, quick recap. While surface web is all the stuff you can Google, deep web is all the stuff you need special permission to access. And to be super clear, the deep web is not the dark web. A lot of people mix those two terms up, but they are not interchangeable. Now, the dark web is the deepest and least accessible part of the internet. It's that part of the iceberg that's way deep down there.
The dark web or the dark nets are parts of the internet that require special software to get access to special addresses, like a .onion, a .bit, a .i2p. You cannot just go type in your normal browser. Like, you can't just take Chrome or Safari or Firefox and just type in, silkroad.onion. It won't go anywhere. It's not a valid domain name. You have to have Tor installed. You have to have your browser configured for Tor. And that's what the dark nets or the dark webs are.
So, of course, we asked Andrew if he had an analogy to explain the dark web. Something to help us grasp this tech buzzword concept a little bit better.
The dark web or the dark nets are parts of the town that your parents always say don't go to. For some of you, it could be where all the fun stuff is. For most people, it's where all the bad stuff happens. A lot of them were sold or built as a panacea for solving all the problems on the internet. And then, of course, the criminal world has just taken them over.
That's a great analogy. Think of the dark web as the part of town where you find things that are a little less halal. As Andrew mentioned, that area of the dark web isn't on the map. It's not on Google. It's not accessible with Chrome or Safari or any basic internet browser. What that means is that you can hide there. And maybe that's why criminal activity ended up there, and with seemingly no consequences. Or maybe it's because the dark web is all about anonymity. Anonymity. You get it. To access and live on the anonymous internet, you need software that supports anonymity. And like a lot of forward-thinking technologies, that began with the military.
Some of the best-known darknets are Tor, ZeroNet, and I2P. And Tor and I2P are similar, that they're based on this concept called onion routing, which was developed by the U.S. Navy in the 1990s.
Yeah, why did the Navy, why were they developing this in the first place?
So the military was looking to secure communications. And, if you think of, I guess an analogy is, I'm sure everyone's seen at least one war movie, and there's always some poor soldier with a giant antenna sticking out of their backpack. That's the communications officer. That's the communications point back to HQ or to field HQ. And if you're a sniper, you need someone to take out to stop communications back to base. So you look for the person with the giant antenna. And the analogy for the Onion Routing project is either all the soldiers have antennas or none of them have antennas. And now you're a sniper with one shot before the force reacts. Who do you take out? Or you just hold your shot and wait to find some other information.
That's crazy. But it makes sense that this would come from the military. The whole concept of the internet came from the U.S. Department of Defense. It actually originated with DARPA, which back then was known as ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Right. So darknets go all the way back to around the mid-1980s. And some professors at MIT started working on this, started saying, hey, why don't we create an encrypted, anonymous overlay over the existing internet? So there's a bunch of technical terms that is basically everything's encrypted, no one knows who anyone is, and there's no easy way to trace people.
One way that Tor hides a person or website's location is by sending data in random routes, from computer to computer to computer to another computer. By doing so, it makes it incredibly hard to find where things all started. Kind of like layers of an onion, but an encrypted onion, with a ton of encryption layers. Each time you peel a layer, there it is, another encryption.
So the core idea of the Onion Routing project was for just called traffic analysis resistance. Basically, if someone can
like the military use case, there was, and still are, plenty of legit reasons to have an anonymous internet. For example, you might not want advertisers to track you online. You might want a safe space to discuss medical issues or to give honest customer reviews. You may want to be able to express yourself or discuss political or social issues without fear of persecution. This is what the dark web could provide. Privacy and free speech, two massive value props of this ecosystem. And that's why some very legit entities have dark web sites. Facebook launched a dark web version of their site for better security and privacy. BBC launched a site to stop media censorship. Even the CIA has a Tor site to communicate on the dark web. But everything is not all rainbows and Care Bears. Remember, this is the bad part of town.
If you've heard of things like Silk Road or Alphabet or Hansa, they're marketplaces that sold all sorts of drugs and weapons and fake IDs and counterfeit passports and counterfeit money, and other programs, hacking programs to break into other companies.
Of all those dark websites, the most famous was the one called Silk Road. If you've read, seen, or heard anything about it, you've probably also heard of the founder. He became pretty infamous.
His nickname was the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Hey, do me a favor. Remember that name.
He was out there talking about and marketing heavily, here's how to get on my marketplace site. And he made some really simple websites that are available anywhere in the world, like .com, .net, .org sites that walked you through a simple 3-step process. 1, go download to a browser. 2, copy and paste this address, which was, just for the sake of argument, say it was silkroad.onion. Copy paste that address in a Tor browser. And then 3, create an account and buy some Bitcoin. And here's what Bitcoin is. Here's how to get involved in Bitcoin. And now you're on my marketplace, which is called Silk Road. And a bunch of vendors, say you wanted some hard, cocaine, heroin, MDMA, whatever you wanted was there. Or you wanted some fake IDs or whatever, you can go buy it there. And it's all anonymous. And it seems that the criminals have just overrun everything. And, law enforcement is still catching up.
One day, I'm in my suit, I'm going to a meeting, and I get stopped in the middle. And they said, oh, no, come in this office. And I was like, why? I have a meeting. They was like, no. You can skip the meeting, which is usually a bad sign. So I go into the meeting, and my bosses are there. And they said, oh, we have a great opportunity for you. So I was like, uh-oh, what is this opportunity? And they said, well, have you ever heard about Silk Road? And I said, no. They said, okay. Have you heard about Tor or the Onion browser or this hidden darknet? No. Did you hear about Bitcoin? No. You don't know about any of these things. And they explained to me Silk Road was this underground website that was selling drugs, almost like the Amazon of drugs. And they wanted me to lead an investigation or take over the investigation into it. And I knew nothing about it. They said, well, can you handle it? And I said, I could.
Now, at this point, Silk Road had come to define the dark web. They had become synonymous, like two peas in a pod, peanut butter and jelly, Siegfried and Roy, Chris Tucker, and Jackie Chan. But the thing was, no one knew who created Silk Road. Everyone just knew that same screen name.
Yes, so the name he had was this Dread Pirate Roberts.
One of the things we did know about Dread Pirate Roberts was that he or she was smart and slippery. I mean, very smart and very slippery. Enough so that Dread Pirate Roberts stayed ahead of the law for years. Seriously, no one could unmask Dread Pirate Roberts or even get close to doing so. That is, until one persistent IRS agent was put on the case.
Hi, my name is Gary Alford. I'm a Supervisory Special Agent for IRS Criminal Investigation. I'm most known for my involvement in the Silk Road investigation.
Taking a step back, it's worth mentioning that Silk Road wasn't necessarily started with all of this malintent. The essence of the site was that it was a free market, connecting buyers and sellers outside of the scope of government control or interference. It was kind of like a libertarian experiment in that sense. And I'm not defending it, but there was this ideology behind it to give humans the means to decide things for themselves, or at least what they would buy or sell or use or consume. Sometimes that meant counterfeit products. Sometimes that meant fake IDs. A lot of that time it meant drugs. But online, with Silk Road, you could do all of that without the need to engage in sketchy back alley transactions in the bad part of town. Instead, you could get all sorts of contraband online with pretty great customer service.
Dark web is like the internet, but it's a underground internet or an underground marketplace. So if you think of the internet as being in the open, just like addresses in the street, you go to a market, you see the store, you see addresses. Well, the dark net is more hidden. So the people who go in and out of this market, they're hiding or concealing who they are and the places they're going and or maybe the topics they're talking about are more hidden. So you can imagine if someone was spending too much, they want to hide, they want to use cash when they go to Macy's or some other store because they don't want them to know that they're spending all the money. Mm-hmm. But now the store itself would be hidden. Now that is kind of unusual. Normally you want to find a store, they have billboards say, come to my store. You're trying to drive people to the store. But now you have a store that's in the middle of nowhere, let's say, and you can't find it. You have to specifically locate it. Normally stores don't operate that way.
Right. Normally stores don't operate like that. Normally if you run a store, you want to advertise. You want people to know about you and come to your store and buy stuff. That makes sense. A store wants you to know where they are. But I guess sometimes maybe they don't.
You can imagine sometimes the reason that is because people are searching for it for illicit activity. So this was the unintended consequences. And this led to, let's say, a lot of black market activity on Tor or the darknet.
Voila. Silk Road. Gary is with the IRS, as in the Internal Revenue Service, most commonly known as the tax man. And while I did understand why the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, would get involved in this case, I mean, it's right up their alley. It's about catching a drug-related marketplace. I wasn't so sure what Gary and the IRS were doing chasing down Dread Pirate Roberts.
Well, we track money. So normally we track money in terms of tax cases. So usually we're looking to an allegation that someone's making money or they're not reporting it. But we also have a lot of investigation into illicit activities. So a lot of people forget our most famous case was Al Capone. So some people know in the tax law, we don't discriminate. Illegal money, legal money, it's the same. It has to report.
I mean, if the IRS could take down Al Capone, then yeah, definitely. Let's put him on the case. The only thing is that in its lifetime, Silk Road cleared hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions. That's a lot more Bitcoin than Capone. Now, realizing that Silk Road made that much money made me think. As Gary mentioned, no one is advertising their underground marketplace. There's no Facebook ads, there's no billboards. So how on earth are you getting anyone to that site, let alone attracting enough people to make up a couple $100 million in sales? Gary asked the same question.
So the first thing that got to me is like, okay, you look at it like it's a business. Okay, just like Facebook, whoever's running this is not some mythical hero. He's just some person like me sitting in front of a screen. So wouldn't I like if I had a pizza store hand out some pamphlets or something? So I said, let me see what was the first mention ever on the internet about this Silk Road, because you can't just find it. And I'll start there.
Someone had to advertise it one person had to tell at least one other person, or no one will ever find it.
So if someone had a local drug dealer that no one knew, well, someone had to tell them, hey, this person sells drugs and it's good drugs. So, well, who was the first person to ever say this? So I started looking at it. So I started looking for the first ever mention. And then doing that, I found these two postings from a user named Altoid. And they were on two separate sites. And it was like a person like, hey, if someone's looking for drugs, have you ever saw this site? So it kind of looked like advertising. So I said, this is a pattern. And when looking into who Altoid was, I started looking at all the posts on this one discussion forum, the Bitcoin forum. The person put an email address, and it had an email address, rossobert@gmail.com. And that is quite a unique name. So it wasn't too hard to find out who Ross Ulbricht was.
I picture you as this film noir agent at home sleuthing on the internet, trying to find this guy's name, and you found it. And so now you're saying stuff matched up to this guy, this potential Dread Pirate Roberts.
It's funny you say that, because that's kind of how it happened. It happened almost like in the middle of the night. I was thinking about it, and I just had this idea. And usually a lot of my thoughts come at night because it's quiet. And my now wife, but fiance then, I jumped out of bed. I said, I have this idea. How did he get it out there? So I really went downstairs and started looking up, and along came this post, and I was like, this is very interesting, because it's something that it seemed at the time that not too many people would have found, because I hadn't read about it.
How good is that story? Gary just lounging in bed thinking about stuff, and then suddenly he has that stroke of genius. I can just picture him running out of bed, grabbing his computer, and then furiously Googling stuff left and right. The crazy thing is, it seemed to have worked. Late-night Google searches and internet sleuthing provided Gary with a clue that might just crack this case.
The thing was, Mr. Ulbricht was a unique person. He was an Eagle Scout. So nothing, let's say, on the surface screamed, I'm running a multi-million-dollar international drug empire fighting the U.S. government. However, you just couldn't ignore the fact that the evidence was kind of pointing at him. So by the time I got into, everybody was investigating it, not just the DEA, not just New York, all over the country and worldwide. Internet researchers were trying to figure out, because it was this great mystery. Who's running it? Who is this folk hero, Dread Pirate Roberts?
A few months into the case, Gary gets a call from the FBI. He arrives at their office and learns they have pulled off what everyone thought was impossible. The FBI had found the server Silk Road was being hosted on and had made a copy of it.
About a month later, I was invited over to FBI to take a look at the server. So when I went to their space, they had stuff all over the wall.
What kind of stuff do they have on the wall? I just pictured faces with clothing, threads with pins.
Yeah, you're right. There's Post-its, there's diagrams. I did notice there was all these arrows at the top, and they had the name of a cafe, and it was in San Francisco. So I was like, really? And I was like, well, I have a guy. I'm looking at a guy from San Francisco, and the prosecutor was there, and agents were there. I believe the prosecutor was there, and they kind of just dismissed it. I mean, at the time, I guess a lot of people had people out of San Francisco, right. And I kind of said to myself, I'm never coming back here. This is their investigation. Just leave it alone,
right,
and just move on.
Right.
So that happened, but it was hard.
But you didn't leave it alone.
I couldn't. So I became, I was annoying at the workplace because I was back at work and I just still thought I was right. And I was like, well, how come they haven't taken him down?
This is the part of the story where our protagonist gets a bit discouraged, but something doesn't let him let it go. He's convinced, he's passionate, he's committed, but he didn't have many options. So Gary did the only thing he could think of. He did everything again, just in case he missed something. One of the first things Gary revisited was checking Mr. Ulbricht's travel. If he was Dread Pirate Roberts, then he had to have made some attempt to get out of the country, right? So Gary asked Homeland Security to run a search on Ross Ulbricht one last time.
They said, hey, there's a hit on Mr. Ulbricht. I said, what? What do you mean a hit? He said, he's in the computer. I said, no, he's not. Let me see.
This is a tipping point. Apparently in July 2013, Department of Homeland Security investigators discovered that no fewer than 7 fake passports were being delivered to Mr. Ulbricht's house. They intercepted those passports, found their way to his house, and they knocked on the door.
And I guess Mr. Ulbricht is a fast thinker because they start questioning him. So he has to admit that he's going by a different name. He's paying by cash. But I guess the agents, I theorize, were not so much interested in the person receiving the IDs. They were more interested in where were you getting the IDs. So Mr. Ulbricht said, well, hypothetically, you could get them on Silk Road.
When we heard this, it felt like a whoops. Like, why would you ever say that? But I actually think it was hubris. It was the type of hubris that someone that starts a massive underground marketplace on the dark web would have. It was Ross Ulbricht smiling in the face of the law.
So I'm like, it's him. It's him. I'm like losing it. So I go running into my boss's office. It's him. It's him. Because I didn't really realize I was trying to convince people for so long. And then he was like, when I told him, he was like, okay, you have to call the prosecutor. So I called the prosecutor and I told him very excitedly what I came up with because I had been talking to him for, let's say, several weeks about Mr. Ulbricht. And he's like, wait, say again. I was like, fake IDs. This guy who's an Eagle Scout. Tell me why he's living under a false name. Tell me why he's living by cash. Tell me why he needs 7 fake IDs. Tell me how he knows about hypothetically Silk Road.
In that phone call with the prosecutor and the other agents, Gary connected the dots. He linked Ulbricht, Silk Road, and an IP address all in San Francisco.
For some people on the phone call, that was very strong. So by the end of that phone call, I believe everybody was pretty much convinced that Mr. Ulbricht was Dread Pirate Roberts, which actually I didn't feel as much pressure before. I felt more pressure after the phone call.
Why is that?
Because before it was just, I thought I was right. I was just...
Now you better be right. Things escalated pretty quickly after this.
And multiple agencies and a case that big.
And soon enough, the team headed out to San Francisco to make the bust on Mr. Ulbricht. But to do so, they wanted to catch him logged in to the inner workings of the site as an admin. Catching Ross Ulbricht logged in would mean there was no doubt that he was the alter ego of the infamous dark web mastermind, Dread Pirate Roberts. Luckily for law enforcement, Mr. Ulbricht chose to work out of a public library that day instead of in his home. Once he got there, the undercover agents got into position, all of them with eyes on his screen, and then they tried to bait Ross Ulbricht with a customer service ticket that was submitted to Silk Road.
The undercover told him, well, there was a customer service ticket. So just like a regular website, people have problems like customer service with buying drugs. Things weren't shipped or have a problem. So he said, the undercover told Dread Pirate Roberts, hey, I have this customer service ticket. Do you mind looking at it? So for Dread Pirate Roberts to look at it, he'd had to log into the part of the website that only Dread Pirate Roberts could sign into. So then when he logged in and said, here's this, oh, I see the ticket here, we knew that he was signed in into the inner workings of Silk Road.
At this point, agents swooped in.
As soon as he turned, the computer was snatched away. And then we turned back, we had the computer in custody, and then he was arrested. So we got him literally, as some people say, riding dirty when they get drug deals. He was typing dirty. Mr. Ulbricht changed the world. There is no putting genie back in that bottle.
Looking into our crystal ball, where's the dark web going in the future? Is it going to change our lives for the better or for the worse? After all that noise that Silk Road caused, along with the copycat sites that followed, is there even room or even a need for the dark web moving forward?
I think dark web will be part of our future. I think now people are more knowledgeable. When Silk Road started, it was more naivete. So some people thought that it would only be used for good. But now, just like most technology, it was used for bad. But I think there are good uses for it because the internet is different than it was when I first started. A lot of people, that's where they do most of their communication. So I can see the need for some of the privacy to try to keep it hidden because a lot of people don't talk in real life anymore. So I do see a place for it. And it's just a matter of having people understand how the technology works, because ultimately, hopefully, people will try to, on themselves, limit the bad uses of it and won't support the bad uses of it.
Gary is totally right. Today's enormous reliance on technology is a great reason why privacy is more important than it ever was. I really like that optimistic view that we'll all begin to better understand, appreciate, and police this technology ourselves.
I think it's community driven. So I've watched on ZeroNet, there's, a ton of child abuse sites have popped up because it's, quote, anonymous and decentralized. So there's no one machine to take down, only thousands of them. But there are communities who now do child abuse block lists. Like, here's a list of all the sites that are bad, and other sites can subscribe to it, and you can subscribe to it and automatically not visit those sites.
So if someone was in a community and there's all the neighbors and someone in that community, they could see it and someone shot someone else and everyone in that community saw it. Well, all it takes is for one person to say, I witnessed it. I saw who shot him. It was this person, to have that courage. But if we live in a society where no one wants to step forward, even though everybody saw it, then what is law enforcement going to do? I always tell people, well, the Google car is going around. I've seen it many times. It's collecting information. So is the issue that you don't like the information being collected, or is it a question of what is the sign on the side of the car about who's collecting it? Because privacy is privacy.
Balancing privacy and security is a delicate dance.
At Tor was that, technology is agnostic, and you can go buy steak knives anywhere in the world. No one will ask you a question. Most people assume you're going to use it to cut meat or cut vegetables and not stab people with. And it's just a matter of what's societally, what's acceptable. And, with some of these more advanced technologies like the darknets and all that, you would never put a brand new driver into a race car without giving them some training education. And I think it's the same sort of way of, moving people along to say, hey, before you use these darknets, realize the power you have here. Tools and technologies will always be out there. So I don't think you'll ever be able to define this is safe technology, this is unsafe technology. It's just technology. Just like cars, we've seen cars used to run over people in a protest, but for the vast majority of usage is to get people from point A to point B. It's a human problem. It's not a technology problem.
When you ask people to pick any superpower, anything in the world, what would it be? You get a lot of cool answers. Ability to fly, mind reading, endless napping. Sometimes you get invisibility. And that's a superpower that the dark web and Tor provide. Surfing the dark web is anonymous. And in anonymity, you find invisibility. Which is cool. In a time where all of our personal data is online, and I swear to God our phones are listening to us, anonymity affords us this beautiful shield of privacy. Let alone for people in military situations, or under oppressive regimes, or people dealing with horrible situations where they need a protected channel to say, help. That is where this technology is incredibly valuable. But what invisibility also provides is the ability for us to act without consequence, without someone knowing it was you. That's the interesting thing about this technology. Sometimes it really just amplifies human behaviors and our own natural tendencies, good and bad. Sometimes technology acts as a mirror. That's not the dark web's fault. That's not Tor's fault. It's not up to the engineers, scientists, or technologists to fix this one. It's up to us as people to make sure the good voices on the dark web, on the deep web, on the surface web, and in real life are always loud enough and strong enough to drown out the bad. Thank you to our guests, Andrew Lewman and Gary Alford. Today's episode was written and hosted by me, Mahan Zanouzi, produced by Karine Javier and Lee Schneider, exec produced by Steph Wolf. Music by Ouvra. You can find more Same on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your ear candy. Thanks for listening. Spread love.
This episode was brought to you in part by BCG Digital Ventures. BCG DV builds revolutionary new businesses with the world's most influential corporations. Learn more at bcgdv.com.
The name he had was this Dread Pirate Roberts, which comes from the movie The Princess Bride. So it was an ingenious also marketing strategy. So for those, unlike me, I did watch it growing up. I'm a little bit of a nerd. It was this character it was a Dread Pirate Roberts, but he would pass on the title to the next captain. So he would have a ship, he would dock, he would have everybody go off, and he would fire everyone. And then he had got a whole new crew. But what people didn't know is he had switched to a new person, and that person went by Dread Pirate Roberts. So it was like a mythical, who is this person? It could be the 50th person. And it was great. It really caught on. So we were trying to figure out who was this Dread Pirate Roberts.
That was great. I think I'm going to buy your movie rights. Can we make a film?